On a quiet farm in East Ardsley, West Yorkshire, security footage captures three men preparing for revenge. 53-year-old farmer Richard Bathie runs across the yard toward a huge yellow JCB digger. He climbs into the cab, fires up the engine, and backs the machine out into the yard. His 18-year-old son Joshua disappears into the farmhouse and comes back out carrying a double-barrel shotgun, a legally held weapon kept on the property. Also standing in the yard is Sean McDermott. Phones have already been buzzing with calls and texts about what happened earlier, about who's bottled who's been smashed, and what's going to be done about it. Within less than an hour of this footage being recorded, these same three men will drive this JCB and a white Mercedes flatbed van into a small family-run caravan site in Tingley and trap their rivals inside. They'll smash cars and windows, terrify women and children, and discharge that double-barrel shotgun into two men at close range. Both will need emergency surgery to survive. This is not a random shooting. It's the climax of a family feud that's been simmering in the background, which has exploded over the course of a single day. The seeds of that day's violence were sown within a close-knit community in West Yorkshire. On Sunday, August 8, 2021, members of the Bathie family, a local farming family from East Ardsley, were hosting a christening celebration for a young child. The festivities took place at the Hanging Heaton Golf Club in Dewsbury, and guests included relatives and friends from the community. Among those invited was 28-year-old Patrick Doran, who lived at the Tingley caravan park. Doran's presence was notable. Prosecutors later suggested he may not have been such a welcome guest at the Bathie family's event. There were whispers of bad blood between the families, a long-running feud that had been smouldering beneath the surface. As the afternoon wore on, tensions flared at the golf club. Accounts differ on exactly what sparked the confrontation, but by around 4:30 p.m., an argument had broken out between Patrick Doran and Richard Bathie. Richard was a 53-year-old farmer and the host of the christening party. According to Richard's later testimony, he became enraged upon hearing that Doran was spotted messing with white powder in the toilets, implying that Doran had brought drugs to the family event. Some witnesses gave statements, recalling that Patrick got lippy with Richard, suggesting Doran might have mouthed off or shown disrespect. Whatever the initial provocation, the confrontation quickly turned physical. CCTV from the golf club parking lot later showed Richard Bathie taking off his jacket and marching toward Doran. Richard began pummeling Doran with his fists, landing several punches. The sudden attack triggered a broader brawl. Richard's teenage son Joshua Bathie, 18 years old at the time, and their cousin-nephew Sean McDermott jumped in to support Richard. Witnesses described Doran being overwhelmed by a series of blows, including punches and kicks as the fight spilled out of the car park and onto a nearby road. By the time the fight ended, Patrick Doran had been badly roughed up. Furious at being jumped and beaten, left the christening melee plotting payback. By roughly 5 p.m. that afternoon, Sean McDermott was spotted at a nearby pub called the Hare and Hounds in West Ardsley. His shirt was stained with blood, yet McDermott was in high spirits, even showing off his boxing moves to mates in the pub car park. At the same time, 18-year-old Joshua Bathie was on his phone bragging about the beatdown. Buzzing, Joshua texted McDermott, to which McDermott replied, "You smashed it," praising the teenager's part in attacking Doran. Joshua texted back proudly, "Bathie boys, no matter what." The Bathies and McDermott clearly felt the score had been settled in their favor. Patrick Doran, however, was not about to let the assault go unanswered. After regrouping, Doran enlisted his cousin, William Price, to strike back. William Price was Doran's closest ally. The two cousins grew up together and lived on the same family caravan site. Seeing Doran bloodied and bruised, Price agreed to confront the Bathie crew. They knew they couldn't walk back into the christening venue outnumbered. Instead, they looked for a more vulnerable target. That target was Sean McDermott. Sean had separated from the Bathies after the fight, heading to his home on Road in West Ardsley. Not long after 5:30 p.m, an Audi car screeched to a stop outside McDermott's house. Inside were Patrick Doran and William Price, out for revenge. They found McDermott and attacked swiftly. Price hung back while Doran charged McDermott. Armed with a glass bottle, Doran smashed McDermott over the head. It was a quick hit-and-run attack. Dazed and bleeding from his head wound, Sean McDermott grabbed his phone and, at roughly 5:45 p.m, dialed Richard Bathie. The call was brief and urgent. He was beyond fury as he relayed what happened. Richard and his son Joshua came speeding to McDermott's house in their vehicle. CCTV cameras in the neighborhood captured the Bathies arriving at Tingley Road just before 6 p.m. On the footage, Joshua can be seen kicking over traffic cones in the street, red-faced with rage, shouting, "Where the f*** are they? I will kill the lot of them." His father Richard was also seething. Witnesses heard Richard encouraging McDermott to join them in exacting revenge. Richard and Joshua decided on the next step. Patrick Doran and William Price had already fled, likely back to the safety of their home turf at the caravan site in Tingley. Richard formulated a more drastic plan. If the targets had retreated to their family stronghold, the Bathies would bring the fight to the Price camp directly. According to later court testimony, Joshua was agitated and aggressive, and Richard outright declared he was going to get his gun. The situation was about to escalate from sticks and fists to firearms and deadly intent. Leaving McDermott's house in a state of collective fury, the Bathie men regrouped at their home base, and crucially, it housed something the Bathies now intended to use: legally owned firearms. As long-time farmers, the Bathies had shotgun licenses for pest control or sport, and Richard Bathie possessed a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun. Around 6:20 p.m, security cameras at Lowfold Farm captured frantic activity. The footage, later shown in court, showed Joshua Bathie running into the farmhouse and emerging with an Italian-made double-barreled shotgun, a weapon that had been kept on the property under lock and key. Richard Bathie appears shirtless on the CCTV, sprinting toward a large JCB telehandler parked in a shed. He clambers into the driver's seat and backs the JCB out of the farm building, while Joshua and Sean hurriedly gather additional weapons. Investigators later noted that this was a premeditated mission of vengeance, a coordinated armed expedition to ambush their rivals. The convoy set off from the farm shortly before 6:30 p.m. They peeled out of the farm entrance and headed toward Tingley, with the JCB leading the way on the public roads. Adrenaline pumping, they likely rationalized that they had to do this to protect their own family's honor. Richard Bathie would later claim in court that he only intended to scare Doran and Price with the gun, that he never meant to actually shoot anyone. But the events about to unfold told a very different story. There was ample time to reflect on what they were doing, and to stop during that drive from the farm to Tingley. Racing toward the caravan site, the Bathie convoy was joined by a fourth participant, 25-year-old Edward Sr., a family friend. Sr. had actually been at the earlier christening party and left before the trouble. However, he remained in contact via text and learned of the escalating violence. Sr. followed behind in his Ford Focus. The Price family's caravan park was a small private site near the M62 motorway, a gated yard where multiple generations of the Dorans lived in caravans and mobile homes. On that summer Sunday, many relatives were at home. At roughly 6:30 p.m, the convoy arrived. The JCB turned into the caravan park's entrance, blocking the single access gate. Witnesses later recalled Richard Bathie leaning out of the JCB, shouting abuse and threats toward the site's residents. "You f***ed it this time," he screamed repeatedly, targeting Patrick Doran and William Price with his words. Sean McDermott jumped out from the pickup truck passenger side with the shotgun in hand, and Joshua Bathie emerged wielding the machete. Car and caravan windows began shattering as the intruders swung their weapons at any property in reach. Amid the chaos, McDermott raised the shotgun and fired the first shot as a warning. Doran confronted the attackers as they pushed into the site. Doran later told police that as soon as the trio burst in, Joshua Bathie came at him with the machete, slashing at him. Doran managed to evade a fatal blow, but he was now bleeding and trying to fight off Joshua. At the same time, William Price squared off with Sean McDermott, who was pointing the shotgun. Price's sister, watching in horror, saw McDermott stride up to William Price and point the shotgun toward him. William, desperate and unarmed, lunged forward and grabbed at the double barrels of the gun in an attempt to wrestle it away. A brief struggle ensued. It was during this scuffle that McDermott pulled the trigger again. The shotgun blast tore into William Price's left arm at close range, causing catastrophic injuries. Price screamed as his elbow was shattered and the flesh of his forearm was mangled. McDermott swung around toward Doran. McDermott aimed the shotgun at Doran's chest. Seeing the barrel aimed at him, Doran threw up his right hand in a defensive gesture, palm out. McDermott fired the shotgun at Doran point blank. The blast hit Doran's raised hand, blowing off 3 of his fingers. The shot also penetrated into Doran's upper thigh groin area, causing a serious wound near his hip. William Price's sister intervened. She screamed and pleaded for mercy, yelling at McDermott to stop. McDermott hesitated and did not fire again after the second shot. Before fleeing, one of the attackers warned the onlookers not to go to the police. They wanted to enforce a code of silence, a common tactic in violent feuds, though unbeknownst to them, an emergency call had already been made. The 3 attackers, joined by their accomplice Edward Sr., knew they needed to hide the evidence, especially the firearm which could directly tie them to the shootings. Their destination was once again the Bathie family farm on Woodhouse Lane. Time was of the essence. By now, police had undoubtedly been alerted and descriptions of the unusual getaway vehicles would be known. Once on the farm property, Sean McDermott handed the shotgun over to Edward Sr. He took the shotgun to a remote corner of the farm's outbuildings. There, he found a massive stack of hay bales, wrapped in plastic. Senior shoved the shotgun deep into the stack of bales, hiding it from sight. He also took a bag of shotgun cartridges and wedged it between the bales too. Senior also helped dispose of other evidence. At the farm, security footage later showed him taking away clothing that the 3 attackers had worn during the shooting. A major police investigation swung into action. Detectives treated the case as 2 counts of attempted murder. The Bathies hadn't considered that their own farm's security cameras would become damning evidence. Footage from Lowfold Farm clearly showed them arming themselves and departing in convoy with the weapons. Armed with witness statements and initial evidence, police arrested Richard Bathie, Joshua Bathie, and Sean McDermott. Investigators scoured the Bathie farm property looking for the shotgun, knowing the suspects had returned there. It ultimately took a 4-day search of the farm to find the weapon. Nearby, they recovered the stashed shotgun shells as well. Additionally, forensic teams found a footwear impression on one of the hay bales. That print matched shoes worn by Joshua Bathie. Investigators also found blood-spattered clothing and shoes discarded on the farm. Sean McDermott's shoes, stained with victims' blood, were found hidden inside a traffic cone on the property. Doran and William Price underwent emergency surgeries the night of the attack to save their limbs and repair damage. At the hospital, doctors tried to reconstruct Doran's shredded fingers, but the damage was too severe. He had to have parts of 3 fingers amputated. He also required surgeries for his groin wound. William Price's left arm was in awful shape. He suffered extensive muscle damage and would never regain full use of that arm. Both men would remain hospitalized for a long period and face ongoing physical therapy and pain. Later statements revealed Doran developed PTSD, constantly looking over his shoulder in fear, and Price said he lived in a constant state of panic after the incident. By late August 2021, the police had enough evidence to formally charge the perpetrators. Richard Bathie, Joshua Bathie, and Sean McDermott were each charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Additionally, Joshua Bathie was charged with having an offensive weapon for the machete attack on Doran. Edward Sr. was charged with assisting an offender, perverting the course of justice for hiding the gun and evidence. The trial took place at Leeds Crown Court in early 2022. Richard Bathie, Joshua Bathie, and Sean McDermott all pleaded not guilty to the attempted murder and firearms charges, necessitating a full jury trial. Edward Sr., on the other hand, eventually pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice. Over the course of the trial, which began in February, jurors were presented with a wealth of evidence gathered by investigators: phone records, forensics, and eyewitness testimony. A particularly emotional moment in court came when a Price family woman testified about seeing her brother shot in front of her. She truly thought he was going to die right there, and she tearfully described begging the attackers to stop. Forensic experts testified about the gun found in the hay bale and how its bloodstains matched the victim's, and how Joshua Bathie's boot print placed him at the hiding spot. The mountain of evidence painted a devastating picture for the defense. Nevertheless, the defendants tried to explain away their actions. Richard Bathie took the stand in his own defense and spun a story aimed at downgrading his intent. He admitted he went to confront Doran and Price but claimed, "I had no intention to kill them." Richard said he only wanted to frighten them and tell them to back off after the threats he allegedly received. He testified that he armed himself because he'd heard Doran and Price threaten to burn down his farm and harm his sons earlier that day. Richard claimed that things went all wrong once they arrived at the caravan park, that McDermott was attacked by Doran and Price, and in the chaos, the shotgun discharged accidentally. Richard portrayed the shooting as something that just happened in the heat of a messy fight, rather than a pre-planned attempted murder. However, the prosecution tore into these claims. They pointed out, for example, that reloading the shotgun between shots and firing again at a different person hardly sounds like an accident or mere scare tactic. The deliberation and planning, driving miles to get a gun, bringing a digger to trap victims, suggested a clear intent to cause maximum harm. The jury also heard that, after the fact, the Bathies didn't call an ambulance or police to help the injured. Instead, they hid the gun and clothes, demonstrating guilt. As for McDermott and Joshua, they largely relied on the argument that Richard was the ringleader, and things escalated unexpectedly. Joshua's defense highlighted his youth, just 18, and that he was influenced by his father's authority. McDermott's defense was that he never meant to kill, only to retaliate for being bottled. After deliberation, the jury reached a verdict in March. They found that Sean McDermott, the one who actually pulled the trigger, was guilty of attempted murder for both victims. The jurors evidently concluded that McDermott fully intended to kill, or at least cause lethal harm when he fired at Price and Doran. Richard and Joshua were each found guilty of 2 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent, which is still a very serious felony in UK law. All 3 were additionally convicted on the firearms offence of possessing a shotgun with intent to endanger life. Edward Sr., having pleaded guilty, did not face a jury verdict. He was awaiting sentencing for his lesser role. It was clear, however, that the court did not buy Sr.'s claims of ignorance. Sr. tried to say he didn't really know what had happened when he hid the gun, but evidence like his thumbs up on CCTV to the perpetrators and texts calling the victims pikeys undermined his denials. In August 2022, the judge passed sentence on the trio of attackers. Sean McDermott was sentenced to 34 years in prison. This reflected his role as the gunman convicted of attempted murder. Richard Bathie received a 21-year prison term. He will have to serve at least 14 years before being eligible for release, given the severity. Joshua Bathie, only 19 by sentencing, was given 15 years in a young offenders institution. The judge did acknowledge Joshua's age and the influence of his father. He assessed Joshua as having a lesser role than Richard, which is partly why Joshua's sentence, though long, was shorter than his father's. Still, 15 years is substantial for a teenager, underlining how grave the crime was. All these sentences added up to 70 years of imprisonment collectively. A month later, Edward Sr. was sentenced for his role. Sr. was handed a 30-month sentence for perverting the course of justice. This was a relatively minor punishment compared to the others, but it ensured that every person involved faced consequences. In sentencing Sr., it emerged that he too had been a friend of the Doran victims in the past, illustrating how complicated these community feuds can be. In the aftermath, Patrick Doran and William Price have had to adjust to life with permanent injuries. Both men also bear deep psychological scars, living in constant anxiety. Doran's diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder means he often relives that evening. The Bathie family, once known locally as respectable farmers, are now known for something far darker. The feud between the Bathies and the Price-Doran family has, for all intents and purposes, been stamped out by the heavy hand of the law. With Richard and Joshua Bathie and Sean McDermott locked away for decades, any threat of continued vendetta is greatly diminished. However, such feuds can linger in memory.